Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 13, The Behavior of a Perfect Person, text number 44. Atmanu Bhutau Tammayam. No one read. Oh. Jahuyat Satya Dri Muni Tato Nirto Viramet Swanu Bhut Yatmani Stitaha Atmanu Bhutau Tam Mayam Juhuyat Satya Drin Muni Tito Niriho Viramet Svanubhut Yatmani Stitaha. At Satvadrin Muni Tito Nirito Viramet
Atman Buddha Dhammayam Juyat Satyadrin
Satvadrin Muni To Nirito Viramet Svanubhut Yatmani Stitaha Atma Anubhutau unto self-realization. Tam, that. Mayam, the false ego of material existence. Juhuyat, should offer as an oblation. Satyadrik, one who has actually realized the ultimate truth. Muni, such a thoughtful person. Tataha, because of this self-realization. Niriha, without material desires. Viramet, one must completely retire from material activities. Svanubhuti Atmani, in self-realization. Stitaha, thus being situated. Translation purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. A learned, thoughtful person must realize that material existence is illusion. This is possible only by self-realization. A self-realized person who has actually seen the truth should retire from all material activities, being situated in self-realization. Purport: by an analytical study of the entire constitution of the body, one can surely come to the conclusion that the soul is different from all the body's material constituents, such as earth, water, fire, and air. Thus, the difference between the body and the soul can be realized by a person who is thoughtful. Manishi or Muni. And after this realization of the individual spirit soul, one can very easily understand the Supreme Spirit soul. One thus realizes that the individual soul is subordinate to the Supreme Spirit soul, he achieves self-realization. As explained in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there are two souls within the body. The body is called Kshetra, and there are two Kshetra Gyanas, or occupants of the body, namely the Supersoul Paramatma and the individual soul. The Supersoul and the individual soul are like two birds sitting on the same tree, the material body. One bird, the individual forgetful bird, is eating the fruit of the tree, not caring for the instructions of the other bird, which is only a witness to the activities of the first bird, who is his friend. When the forgetful bird comes to understand the Supreme Friend who is always with him and trying to give him guidance in different bodies, he takes shelter of the lotus feet of that Supreme Bird. As explained in the yoga process, dhyana vastita yadgatena manasa pashanti yam yoginaha. When one actually becomes a perfect yogi by meditation, he can see the Supreme Friend and surrender unto him. This is the beginning of Bhakti Yoga, or actual life in Krishna consciousness. So the verse again. Atmanubhutau tamayam juhuyat satyadrin muni tito niriho viramet swanubhutyatmani stitaha. A learned, thoughtful person must realize that material existence is illusion. This is possible only by self-realization. A self-realized person who has actually seen the truth should retire from all material activities, being situated in self-realization. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswatunde Ve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Patsyadyade Siddharne. In this verse, there are a number of principles that are explained. The first is that we're not the body. Second is that there's a super soul in our heart, and that by the mercy of the super soul, we can realize Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is further elaborated in the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, second chapter, The Lord in the Heart, text number 35, which is as follows. Bhagavan sarvabhuteshu lakshita swatmana hari drishyara buddhyat yadivir drashta lakshana anuma kapai. Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, is in every living being along with the individual soul. And this fact is perceived and hypothesized in our acts of seeing and taking help from the intelligence. So I'll read that again. It usually takes a few times before we can understand what it says. Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, is in every living being along with the individual soul. So that's easy. And this fact is perceived. In other words, we can actually perceive Krishna within our heart. And hypothesized. In other words, we may not see him directly, but we can see him through the understanding. Just like when the sun comes up in the morning, when it does come up in the morning, then we may not directly perceive the sun, but we can, by the sunlight, we can understand the presence of the sun at that particular time. And how do we do it? In our acts of seeing. So, singing, we're always singing, and therefore we can try to use our singing to see the super soul. And taking help from the intelligence. So people can see, Pashana Pina Pashati, they can see, but they actually don't see. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Ukramantam Sitin Vapi, Punjana Vaganan Vita, Vimudo Nana Pashanti, Pashanti Jnana Chakshusha. The foolish, they cannot understand how a living entity quits his body or what kind of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But those whose eyes are trained with knowledge can see all this clearly. Or Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena Santak Sadaiva Hridayeshu Vilokayanti. One who can actually see Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena. One whose eyes are smeared with love can actually see the personality of Godhead. Now, I'm going to actually read this. This is actually long, so it's quite a long verse. Purport, I should say. The purport is quite long, and I may not be able to finish it today, but next time. Is Pratandamali Maharaj going to give class in between the next time we're going to give class?
He will give on Sunday.
Sunday. And when's the next time we'll give class after this?
Himself?
Me. You know, the person sitting on the Vyasa right now.
Oh, that one.
Tomorrow. Okay, so we'll try and get as much done today as possible, but we'll take it a little bit at a time because Krishna is not so easy to see, although he's easy to see. If we pay attention, he's very easy to see, and if we don't pay attention, it's very difficult to see. So the general argument to the common man is that since the Lord is not visible to our eyes, how can one either surrender unto him or render transcendent loving service unto him? To such a common man, here is a practical suggestion given by Srila Shukadeva Goswami as to how one could perceive the Supreme Lord by reason and perception. In other words, if we combine together reason with our perception, then we can see. And if we just try and see without reason, then we won't see. Actually, the Lord is not perceptible by our present materialized senses. So, we can't see the Lord with our material senses. But when one is convinced of the presence of the Lord by a practical service attitude, in other words, by a practical service attitude, then we become convinced by the Lord. How? There is a revelation by the Lord's mercy. In other words, if we can't see Krishna right now, but if we develop a practical service attitude, then we'll become convinced of the presence of the Lord. So there's a difference between seeing Krishna directly and being convinced that he's actually there. Everyone understand that? In other words, even if we don't see Krishna, just as I gave the analogy, we may not perceive the sun directly, but when we see the sunlight, then we can be convinced that the sun's there. If someone walks in and says, just because there's sunlight, why do you believe that the sun's there? And by that practical service attitude, then there's a revelation by the Lord's mercy. So first, we become convinced of Krishna's presence, then we develop a practical service attitude. Or we should say, if we develop a practical service attitude based upon good association and knowledge, then we become convinced about the presence of the Lord. So all our philosophy is to help us develop a practical service attitude. And if we don't have a practical service attitude, it doesn't matter how much we philosophize about Krishna, we won't see him, we won't understand him. Sometimes we think if I study, then I'll understand Krishna. No, if we study, then we should come to the conclusion I should serve Krishna. That's the purpose of study, is to become convinced that I should become a servant of Krishna and develop a practical service attitude. Then, if we develop a practical service attitude, then Krishna may reveal himself. Does anyone remember anything in Bhagavad Gita that describes this? I always like to ask questions, then there's dead silence. So you can hear yourself think. Anyhow, I'm thinking, what's the Chatur Sloki verses in Bhagavad Gita? Yes. Good, that's the first one. That Krishna is God. He's unlimited. He has unlimited beauty. He has unlimited strength. He has unlimited knowledge. He has unlimited fame. And he's the source of everything. I mean, to be the source of everything is quite a lot. Now, how can the conditioned soul actually be able to perceive the source of everything? How can we perceive something that has unlimited beauty? We can't even see hardly the tip of our nose, even if we try. So what is the power of our sense? Imperfect senses. So how to develop super senses? So the next verse tells us how to do that. Does anyone know the next verse? Tushanti cha, ramanti cha. Yes, very good. That the thoughts of my pure devotees, they dwell in me. Their lives are surrendered to me. So Krishna says two things, prana and chitta. As we'll go over this verse, chitta means consciousness and prana means life, activities. So Krishna consciousness is not just activities, it's also consciousness. That's why we call it Krishna consciousness. So how to develop consciousness through our activities. That's what the sages tell us. That's why we associate with the devotees, to find out how to develop our consciousness through our activities. Now, if we're doing an activity and we're not developing our consciousness, then the activity is incomplete. Not wrong if we act in karma yoga, but better than just karma yoga is jnana yoga. Try to develop our consciousness, and the perfection of that is called bhakti yoga. That when we combine together prana and chitta, then we get bhakti. Well, hopefully we get bhakti when it's engaged in Krishna's service. Our activities and our consciousness engaged in Krishna's service is called bhakti. Now, Krishna says, much shita, much kata, bodhiantash parashparam. And parashparam means that the devotees are on different levels, perhaps, and they exchange with each other how to utilize our consciousness and how to utilize our activities in Krishna's service. So we come to the platform of devotion. And devotion is characterized by two things, tushanti cha, ramanti cha. And then preliminarily, one gets tushanti, satisfaction from three things. There's always three things. One, satisfaction that we realize that actually, to some degree, I'm eternal. We get free from the anxiety to some degree that I'm going to die. That's the main problem in the material existence, is fear of death. And as we realize we're eternal, we get free from anxiety. Those who are in anxiety, material anxiety, are anxiety because they're afraid of dying. And we get knowledge. We begin to understand things clearer. And at the same time, we become more enthusiastic. What is that? Intelligence. Activities performed in knowledge in Krishna consciousness is called enthusiasm. You heard that before? Activities performed in knowledge in Krishna consciousness is called enthusiasm. So activities, knowledge, intelligence, then Krishna consciousness, and then we get enthusiasm, which has different levels. One of them is called tushanti, namely satisfaction, and the other is ramanti, ecstasy, pure love and ecstasy. Now, that's manifested by hearing them from the devotees, which can be manifested in two things. And we can always judge those two things. Devotional service is actually quite simple. We can see how steadily I'm engaged in doing what I'm supposed to be doing in Krishna's service, under Krishna's authorities, and how enthusiastic I am about doing it. We can always break it down to simpler components that are more understandable, more directly applicable, in other words, that we can directly perceive, such as in Srimad Bhagavatam, Tatchidana Munaya. No. Tatchidana Munaya. No. What's the first one? Shara Tatchidana Munaya. Jnana Vairagi Yuktaya. No, it's not right either. That Shushusho Shadadanasya. See, there is a super soul. Shushusho Shadadanasya Vasudeva Kataruchi. So this word Shrusho, this means service attitude. It's another translation of service attitude. And how do we develop the service attitude? That's Su means nicely. Shru means to hear. Shushusho means to hear and then put it into practice. So we hear, and as much as we can understand, then we put it into practice. That's called sincerity, which is the only qualification necessary for devotional service. Just hear something and try to apply it to the best of our ability. That's called sincerity. And if we do that, and how do we apply it? Shadadanasya, with care and attention. Sad means heart. Oh, there's always, in Sanskrit, there's so many words that mean so many different things. But sad can also mean heart, and da means to give. So whatever we pay attention to, that's where our consciousness flows to. Where consciousness goes, energy flows. So whatever we pay attention to, that's what wherever our consciousness goes, that's where our energy is going to go. So if we do things for Krishna, to please him with care and attention, that's how we know if we're doing it to please him. First of all, we have to pay attention, and then there can be some care also. So that's the same thing as steady devotional service with enthusiasm. That's called, steady devotional service is called what? Nishta. And Nishta is the first platform of what? Liberation. Liberation from the bodily conception of life. Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhaktiyo yena sevate sagunan samatityayitam brahma bhuyaya kalpate. That anyone who's engaged fully in devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and comes to the level of Brahman. So all we do is have to realize our eternality is just be steadily engaged in devotional service. We don't have to do anything else. That's why Harinam is so much, or book distribution, or anything that keeps us constantly engaged in Krishna consciousness. Of course, we can be out in Harinam and be looking at the trees while we're chanting Hare Krishna, or walking by the stores and thinking, maybe I'll double back when everyone's not here, and whatever, we may think like that. But if we're actually fixing our mind on the holy name, that's a great benediction, whether it be, or in Bhakti Sushan, the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu becomes even more clear, because one has to adopt one has to get Krishna's intelligence in order to be able to adopt one's presentation to so many different varieties of people. Only by the mercy of Krishna is that possible, in order to sell a book. So, to those who are constantly devoted to work, I give them the intelligence by which they can come to me. So the more we try to be steady, the more we become enthusiastic, do things with care and attention, then Krishna gives us the intelligence by which we can make progress in Krishna consciousness. So it's not just activities, steadiness, and enthusiasm or care and attention is also becoming aware of how everyone and everything is related to Krishna. There are many people who are steadily engaged in selling refrigerators, or I guess vacuum cleaners. And they do it with great enthusiasm, but they don't realize Krishna. Krishna doesn't give them intelligence how to come to him. So it's not that we simply want to be steady and enthusiastic, but we also want to get Krishna's intelligence so we can make progress towards our relationship with Krishna. And when Krishna sees that we're trying to use that intelligence in his service, so we become more enthusiastic, we become more careful and attentive in what we're doing, then Tesham Eva Nukam Partam, that Krishna reveals himself within the heart. And then, as Prabhupada said, there's a revelation by the Lord's mercy. And then one can see, then such a devotee of the Lord can perceive the Lord's presence always and everywhere. So there are different steps, hearing from the devotees, trying to put our chitta, our consciousness in what we're doing, try to apply it in practical devotional service, then doing it more and more enthusiastically and more steadily, getting more and more intelligence by the mercy of Krishna, the super soul in their heart, relying upon that intelligence that's coming from Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and remembering it because of the mercy of the super soul in our heart, who's providing us with that intelligence. Then doing things more and more for Krishna, with the aim being to become Krishna conscious. And then Krishna, when he sees our sincerity, he reveals himself within our heart, and we become ecstatic, and all the material energy, material consciousness gets burned away in that ecstasy, and we can perceive Krishna always and everywhere. And one makes more and more progress in devotional service. Progress never ends, is always increasing. After the liberated stage, one is always enthusiastically engaged in Krishna service. Then Ruchi, Asakti, Bhava, Prema, and then the different stages of Prema, all the way up to Mahabhava. Aruda, Mahabhava. Anyhow, it's unimaginable exactly what was actually obtained by pure devotional service. So, he can perceive the intelligence as the form direction of the Paramatma plenary portion of the personality of Godhead. So I'll repeat that because I've read this I can't count how many times. I still haven't really quite understand what Prabhupada is saying here. He can perceive that intelligence is the form direction of the Paramatma plenary portion of the personality of Godhead. Can anyone explain that? What is form direction? That's the intelligence is the form direction. I'm not exactly sure.
Path.
What's that?
Path. Your path. The way you are.
Yeah, direction means path. Form and direction together. Well, Krishna is giving, we could say this. Intelligence gives us two things. One is it tells us what's out there, the different forms. It describes the forms that we're seeing. And then it tells us what to do on that basis. It tells us how to act according to what we perceive. Is that understandable? In other words, according to what we see, that's how we're going to act. To give a story, one short story, one lion and one bull. They became old, but they made an alliance because, the bull had big horns and the lion was a little old, so he didn't want to take him up in a fight. But one day some days there was a drought in the kingdom, and therefore food became very scarce. And the jackals, they were getting very hungry because the lion was old, he couldn't capture the animals and they didn't get the remnants. Therefore, they decided that they had to kill the bull. They had to get the lion to kill the bull because the jackals couldn't do it. So they went to the bull and they said, actually, my dear bull, we're your friends. But the lion has become very hungry and he decided today he's going to eat you. So the bull said, that couldn't be true. He's like my good friend. We've had this friendship for decades now. How is this possible? He said, no, we came because we're actually your friends. We wanted to warn you. So then they went to the lion and said, we have reliable information that the bull had decided to kill you today. We beware. So the lion became very disturbed and said, how is this possible? Why would the bull want to kill me? So anyhow, at this time the bull came and he saw the lion was very much in anxiety. So he became a little doubtful about, what's going on. So he put his horns down in case the lion was going to attack him. So the lion saw, oh, here he comes. And he immediately rushed over to the bull and jumped on him and and killed him. So that's the power of perception and how our perceptions determine our actions. So according to how we see what's going on, the forms, then it determines what our activities are. And that depends upon intelligence. So if we see someone as my friend, then we act one way. If we see someone as my enemy, we act another way. And generally the material nature is such, it always fulfills our desires. Our perception, it usually confirms them. That's why everyone always thinks they're right, even when they're wrong. Especially when they're wrong. They become more convinced they must be right. Because other people have they think that they must be right, because everyone else thinks they're wrong. So he can perceive that intelligence. So our intelligence can be judged by how we see the different forms and what we do as a result of that. And that's coming from Krishna. For everyone, every living entity. The presence of Paramatma in everyone's company is not difficult to realize, even for the common man. The procedure is as follows. And we're going to start with the procedure tomorrow. So if you want to see Krishna tomorrow, you can come back to the class. Any questions? Comments? Okay.
What gives us strength to say, yes, Krishna and no Maya?
What gives us the strength?
Should I repeat?
No, I know. Yeah, sure.
For the internet. What gives the strength to say, yes, Krishna and no Maya?
Well, you just did it. How did you get the strength to say that? Well, the beginning is the same process I just went over. The beginning is just hearing. But we pay attention. Somehow or another, we pay enough attention to get a little bit of taste. Then we want to hear some more to get some more taste. If someone is on the street and they hear the holy name and they think, oh, that sounds nice, or they like the music, or they get a little prasadam, or they meet a devotee and they like the devotee, somehow or another they develop a taste, especially for the holy name or for the association with devotees, or rarely or sometimes it's possible by philosophy, or they like the pictures, which are not different from the deities. They get a little taste and they become attracted. Yeah, I'll come see what it's like, come to the temple. And then they may hear about Krishna. So, capturing a little bit of their intelligence by focusing their attention a little bit on Krishna in the form of the picture, in the form of the association of devotees, in the form of the holy name, in the form of the philosophy, in some form or another, they get a little taste, and then they start their path to using their intelligence in Krishna's service. That's the way even the beginning is saying a little no to Maya and a little bit yes to Krishna. That's it. Focusing one's attention. And then gradually one can experience a higher taste, which is called giving our love to Krishna. Vishayav-nivartante nirharasideinam rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishva nivartate. The embodied soul may be attracted to sense objects, or may be restricted from sense objects, though the taste for sense objects remains, but ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, one becomes fixed in knowledge. So, the willingness, even a little bit, to focus on the intention on Krishna and give one's love to him, that's how we get the spiritual strength to say no to Maya, by getting a higher taste. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavad Tam Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.